everyone, this is Dawn, and this is part 6 of our retreat. I guess I'll start today with a story from Scripture. So after King David had an affair with Bathsheba, and then David had her husband Uriah killed, Nathan, who was the prophet, he came to David to tell him a parable. He said, a rich man had many sheep, but he stole the one sheep of a poorer neighbor. And David was filled with outrage at how evil this was, and he just wanted to do something about it. And so Nathan then said to David, you're that rich man. So I think of that as we begin this next week. Last week we took time to look at the sin of the world, the rebellion of the world, for which Jesus died on the cross. And now we have to look for that same rebellion within our own hearts. So this week gets a little bit uncomfortable. We like to stay in the realm, the things that are far away from me, but when we have to turn inwards, it gets a whole lot harder. So this week we're asking God for the grace to know our sin completely, so that we can understand the depths of God's love for each one of us personally. The things that we've done and the things that we failed to do, we've all got them. But it goes against the grain of our culture to really examine our hearts before God. In this week, we're not looking to be shamed. What we're doing is we're asking God to show us who we really are, loved sinners. And so I have this nice handout that actually gives you more details, more reflection questions, and a helpful way to pray. So you have that. That'll be linked to this. You can look at that if that's helpful. But essentially, what we need to do is know that this isn't work that we do on our own. We can't sit down and say, I'm going to do this and then I'll be great. This is something that actually is a gift from God to be able to do. And so we begin by asking for the grace to be led and guided along this way. And so maybe you ask God to shed a light on your past so that you can experience the sin that is there, and to know the ways that you were rebellious. You might want to explore your teen years one day and your 20s another day, or you can figure out the way that you'd like to do it. You don't want a vague sense of things. This is getting into the nitty-gritty. You want to explore the concrete actions or inactions, the attitudes that you had, consequences for your decisions, or habits that may have changed or not changed, opportunities for love that you passed up, and ways that you've been deaf to the cry of the poor. Be concrete, but don't leave it just there. Don't just be stuck in a place of shame. That's not what this is about. This is really so you spend part of your day thinking about those things, looking for the concrete actions and such. But then each day, probably near the end of the day, bring all of this to Jesus on the cross. It all goes back to that point. Bring this to Jesus on the cross. End the day by having a conversation, pouring out your heart, friend to friend. And in this, you will find yourself growing with gratitude. Now, it's tempting to say, I know the 10 Commandments. I've not killed anybody. I'm okay. I don't really need to do this. But sin is more than the 10 Commandments. Sin is more relational than that. Sin is how the ways in which we violate or ignore or freely choose to replace God's relationship with a person or with an object with our own self-centered ideas on how things should be. So don't just go through the list of the 10 Commandments. Really walk through this with God, asking Him to shine the light on the areas that you need to work through together. and work through that. I guess in closing, I just would say Jesus did not give up on his friends or his enemies for that matter. He was always speaking and working around, trying to have them come to their full senses to understand things. And so this week, may you stay close to the image of Jesus on the cross, and ask for the grace to be filled with gratitude for the ongoing redeeming love of God that both cancels the debt against us and works that we might have life and have it to the full. Have a good week.